Welcome to NarrativeNook audio tales where enchanted stories come to life. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe, like and share to support our channel. Enjoy listening.
Come on, it's nothing scary, Ruka whispered to herself, patting her chest while trying hard to keep calm by thinking about things that would give her courage, the incident last night where Ren had kissed her, for instance. As she recalled the incident, her cheeks flushed scarlet amid the darkness. Why do I have to think about this, of all things? Still, I couldn't get the kiss last night out of my mind. And besides, that was my first kiss, okay? Wait, I gave him my first kiss in the car before that, so it's considered my second kiss when he kissed me last night. At this moment, several employees were clocking out and chatting at the translation department's entrance. Suddenly, a black sedan came to a screeching halt in front of them, after which a respectable figure with a steady presence stepped out of the car. At once, the employees were stunned for a few seconds. They couldn't believe they were seeing the vice president at this very moment. Is he here for something important? It's got to be something really important that requires him to come in person at such a time. Elijah was more familiar with the place than the others were, so he swiftly led Ren in the direction of the library. Mr. Hassan, the old library is relocated here. It's a place to store documents, so nobody usually comes here. Walking at a rapid pace, Ren was clearly worried about the girl who was trapped inside. He and Elijah were the only ones walking along the corridor since nobody else was coming. Having gotten tired of standing, Ruka sat in the chair next to the door, waiting. When she suddenly heard the sound of footsteps, she was inwardly delighted. Has Mr. Ren arrived? Or has he sent somebody here? Miss Singed, are you inside? Elijah asked. Yes, I am, Ruka answered. Mr. Hassan, please stay with Miss Singed for a moment. I have to get someone to unlock the door, Elijah added before striding off. There was only a steel door between Ruka and the man outside. Even though it was dark, she could sense Ren's fervent gaze upon her. Sorry for bothering you again, she apologized consciously. I like it when you bother me, the man replied in a deep and husky voice. A flush rose to Ruka's cheeks, and she was speechless. I didn't want to trouble you, but I really have no one else to turn to, she explained hastily. The man let out a grumpy snort. Are you so desperate to have nothing to do with me? Ruka was just about to say something in reply when she sensed something slippery moving past her shoes. Aya, she cried and jumped with fright. What happened? The man outside asked hurriedly. Something just moved past my feet. I don't know if it's a snake or a rat. Ruka's voice was trembling. She felt that it was a snake. There were branches outside, so it wasn't impossible for a snake to crawl inside through the window. Hiss, she suddenly cried out in pain. As it turned out, she bumped her head against something while backing away. Just then, the voice of the man outside the door hardened. Stand aside. Before Ruka could realize what was happening, she saw the man outside kicking at the door. She hurriedly stepped aside. All she could hear was the sound of several swift, steady kicks. Soon after that, the old steel door loosened before falling off the wall with a loud bang. Before she could recover from the shock, she was clasped to a warm chest in faint light by a sturdy arm. When the refreshing and sweet smell of male hormones assailed her nostrils, her mind went completely blank. All she could hear was the sound of her panting slightly and her heartbeat. She felt the man's large hand caress the back of her head in the darkness affectionately, which gave her a sense of security. Thanks to the darkness, she enjoyed his embrace even more naturally, though she was still a little frightened with her tiny hand clutching his suit jacket. It wasn't just because of the door that he had kicked down, but also because of the feeling of being clasped in his arms in the darkness at this very moment. It felt like embracing a hidden romance that broke the taboo and couldn't be made public. She looked up in the darkness, only to bump her nose against his coincidentally. The instant their breath mingled, she went stiff all over. Just then, she sensed his breath approaching. He was grabbing the back of her head tenderly and yet domineeringly, as if to give her strong support or to stop her from avoiding what he was going to do. Ruka's brain stopped functioning until the pair of slightly cold, thin lips met hers in the darkness. She felt as though some fireworks had exploded in her head, blowing her reason away so that only her senses were working as she was enveloped by the enchanting smell of hormones. Perhaps because she enjoyed it or because this was too much for her, she let out a kittenish moan, upon which the man let out a chuckle in the darkness. Just then, Elijah's voice sounded outside. "Mr. Hassan. Mr. Hassan, are you all right?" As it turned out, he heard the sound of the door falling down from afar while looking for someone to unlock it. Therefore, he hurriedly turned back without borrowing the key, fearing that anything dangerous might have happened to Ren. When Ruka bared his voice, she instantly stopped clutching the front of Ren's shirt and pushed him instead. Only then did the man let go of her. His breathing was heavy in the darkness, and his warm breath brought color to her cheeks as it brushed against her face. If the lights were on, it'd be obvious that she blushed scarlet. Elijah quickly rushed in, only to be dumbfounded when he saw what was going on inside by the faint light. Not only was Ren all right, but he had a young lady's slim figure hidden in his arms. No amount of darkness could stop Ren from looking daggers at Elijah. In an instant, Elijah felt a chill run down his spine as if he'd be assassinated in the next second. "Mr. Hassan, I'll get someone to come over and repair the door." He made up an excuse, wanting to leave as soon as possible. "Don't bother. Let's go back," Rin said before taking the lady beside him out of the library. Ruka lowered her head in a seemingly obedient manner. However, when the couple entered the brightly lit corridor, she quickly pulled her hand out of the man's grasp, saying to him, "I gotta go first." She dared not even address him, fearing that the others might hear it. Burying one hand in his pocket, the tall and handsome man walked gracefully like a lion king at leisure. He looked at the lady who was fleeing back to the office with a hint of possessiveness in his deep, fathomless eyes. Elijah suggested, "Sir, should we get into the car and wait for Miss Singed first?" After all, it was improper to be seen getting too close to Ruka on such an occasion. Rin nodded slightly while walking toward the car. At the same time, he ordered, "Go find out who locked the door to the library." Elijah was involuntarily startled. "Sir, do you think the door to the library was locked on purpose?" Ren nodded. Not only had the door been locked, but the person who locked the door even turned off the power supply. Obviously, the person had done so to scare Ruka. Ron wouldn't allow such a vicious person to exist around her, so he had to get rid of them. Elijah immediately nodded. "Okay, I'll look into it right away." When Ren reached his car, his bodyguard had opened the car door for him. However, instead of leaving, his motorcade stayed outside the entrance to wait for Ruka. Ruka returned to her office while biting her red lips gently as her beautiful eyes misted over. Like a frightened little fawn, she was at a loss for what to do. At the same time, though, her cheeks were red as though she had applied blush to them. Am I crazy? How could I kiss him like that in the library? Is this reasonable or even legal? She closed her eyes while covering her face with both hands. She felt like crying. She couldn't help feeling that it was reasonable for her to kiss any other man but not Ren. At this moment, it was as though she could still sense the man's domineering breath, his tight embrace, and his strength as he tenderly stroked the back of her head with his large hand. The warmth of his fingertips and his intoxicating breath were still lingering in her mind, making her mouth feel dry. She picked up a glass of water and hurriedly drank a few gulps from it. To her embarrassment, however, she found that just the thought of these things alone sent a tingling sensation throughout her body. This is enough. How can I have feelings for him? I've loved Jethro secretly for 3 years, but that's no match for the 2 days I spent with Ren and the 2 kisses he gave me. What is going on? This feels like disrespect for the 3 years I spent loving someone in secret. How could I be so unfaithful as to fall for another man as soon as I get disappointed in love? Wake up, Ruka. In any case, I can't have anything like that to do with Run. Our identities alone won't allow us to do that. I grew up by Scarlett's side. She's like an adoptive mother to me, so how could I get romantically entangled with her younger brother? After patting her head, she picked up her bag and decided to go home. She strode out of the entrance and was just about to call Rita when she saw a black sedan parked beside the entrance. She had a vague feeling that the car seemed to be Ren's. Just as she was guessing, the back seat car window rolled down slightly. The passenger's face couldn't be seen clearly in the dim light, but Ruka could sense his silent and yet powerful presence. It was Ren indeed. Just then, the bodyguard came forward and said to her, "Miss Singed, Mr. Hassan would like you to get into the car." Ruka waved her hands. "Thanks, but it's not necessary. I'll hail a cab home myself." The bodyguard seemed to be in a tight spot. "In that case, Miss Singed, please get into the car and tell Mr. Hassan about it." Ruka hurriedly directed her gaze toward the figure inside the car. Having no other choice, she took a deep breath and went over to the car window. The man looked up. His face looked breathtakingly and stunningly handsome as the light shone on him. "Get in the car," he said in a deep voice. Not daring to look him in the eye, Ruka lowered her head and replied, "I'm staying at my friend's place." The man frowned. "Your belongings have been sent to my place." Ruka looked up at him in surprise. "Huh? Why would my stuff be sent to your place?" Ron squinted at her. "Is it bad to stay at my place? Do you really have to trouble your friend?" Obviously, it was even better to trouble the man than to trouble her friend. However, in her opinion, she'd rather sleep on the streets than trouble him. "My friend and I are really close. She'd welcome me to stay at her place," she replied while pursing her lips. "The matter's decided. You'll be staying at my place from now on," the man said. With that, he opened the car door, stepped out of the car, and personally signaled her to get into the car with an inviting gesture. Startled, Ruka looked at him while feeling extremely flattered. He's oozing gentleness from every pore, but why do I still sense a dominating aura? It's as if I'll make him look bad if I refuse to get into the car. In the end, such pressure of being forced caused her to bend down and get into his car reluctantly. The instant the car door closed, her heart shuddered, and her breathing became tense, as though she had been abducted into the car. That's right, I'm abducted by this guy's commanding presence, his power, and his seniority. If it were another man, I'd definitely fight to the end and refuse to get into the car no matter what. Ran then got into the car from the other side. When he got into the car, he looked sideways to study the young lady's expression. She was pouting her lips slightly with a hint of displeasure. The bodyguard started the car. Seeing the streetlights and the trees flashing past the car window, Ruka involuntarily relaxed. In reality, she wasn't that averse to going to his place, which was large and comfortable. She knew what she was afraid of, but she couldn't pour it out. 20 minutes later, they arrived at Ren's villa. After they arrived, the bodyguards drove off, not to leave, but to go on duty. Ruka entered the living room to see her suitcase beside the couch. She couldn't help but let out a sigh. Am I gonna be staying at his place no matter what? Ren said to her, do you still like the room last night? If you do, then stay in that guest room. Huh? I like it. Ruka nodded. Rain lifted her suitcase and went upstairs. Stunned, Ruka hurriedly said, let me carry it, Mr. Run. However, the man carried her suitcase upstairs effortlessly. Ruka followed him all the way to her guest room from behind. Run put down the suitcase and surveyed the room as if to see if the room lacked anything. Ruka said behind him, Mr. Run, I don't lack anything. You should go and get some rest. Ron looked back and asked, "Have you had dinner?" Only then did Ruka realize that she never had time to eat after being locked in the library for such a long time. "I'm okay with skipping dinner, though." "No, I haven't, but I'm not hungry," she replied. "Come downstairs for dinner later," the man said before leaving. Ruka was dumbfounded. Is he gonna make dinner for me? Hearing the door close, she still felt somewhat unsettled. She opened her suitcase and unpacked her clothes. The servant had packed up all her clothes, and she hung them up in the wardrobe before letting out an involuntary sigh. "Seems like I'm really gonna be staying here." After unpacking her luggage, she sat down for a while before going to the bathroom to look at herself in the mirror. Her oval face looked fair and plain with no makeup on it. She had always been dissatisfied with her looks. She was going to turn 24 years old, but she still looked naive and ignorant, as though she had gotten old over these years for nothing. She fretted about this, so she always dressed older than her age on purpose. When she came downstairs, she smelled something appetizing, not the rich aroma of cooked food, but the sweet and pure aroma of spring onions. Involuntarily, she turned her eyes toward the kitchen, only to see Ren cooking noodles in the open kitchen while wearing a black sweater with the sleeves rolled up. In an instant, she found herself unable to tear her eyes away from the scene. The graceful and noble qualities he had about him were apparent even when he was doing something as trifling as cooking noodles. Looking at the man who was lowering his head and slicing the grilled steak with rapt attention, she couldn't help but gulp a mouthful of saliva. "I'm so hungry." "Let me help you, Mr. Ren." She went over with a smile and saw the steak that he had dished up beautifully with a floret of broccoli on top for garnish. As she was holding the plate containing the steak, she was greeted with its pleasant aroma. "How I wish I could steal a bite of it." After putting the steak on the table, she saw the man behind her coming over with a bowl of noodles in each hand. It was as though he did everything with such extraordinary grace. Ruka felt a tremendous sense of pleasure overwhelming her. Could I have saved the world in my previous life to be able to eat the food he cooked? Wow! It smells so good, she couldn't help but praise. "You're terrific, Mr. Ron." Ron fastened his eyes on her while naturally putting his hands on the table for support. As he leaned over slightly, his eyes darkened somewhat. "Ruka, from now on, don't call me Mr. Rin anymore." Ruka's eyes widened slightly. "What should I call you, then?" "Call me whatever you like, but don't call me Mr. Rin." "I don't like it." Rin pushed a bowl of noodles toward her. "Call me Rin instead." Ruka was speechless for a moment. "No, I can't do that. Aunt Scarlett is from the same generation as my mom. You're her younger brother, so I should call you Mr. Rin." "If you really don't like that, I can call you Uncle." She insisted on respecting her elders. In particular, she couldn't address her elders wrongly since it'd be a rude thing to do. Ren knitted his brows. He replied somewhat sulkily in a peremptory tone of voice that brooked no retort, "In any case, you can only call me Ren while staying at my place these days." He insisted that she call him so since there weren't so many rules and restrictions at his place. Ruka stopped insisting. Inwardly, she even wanted to smile. Seeing that the man had cooked dinner for her, she curled her lips into a smile, saying, "Okay. I'll call you Ren then, all right?" When Ren saw how obedient she looked, his brow finally cleared. As he was in a good mood, he pulled out his chair and sat down next to her. Ruka hurriedly handed him his fork and spoon. After eating a few bites of the noodles, she asked him, "You kept sending me presents by post earlier. Why didn't you tell me about it so that I can thank you for it?" Ren was startled for a moment. Then, he figured that his assistant must have let it slip and told her about it. "Do you like the gifts?" he asked with a squint. "Yeah, I do," Ruka said before flashing the necklace she was wearing. "Look, I'm wearing it." Ren curled his lips into an attractive smile as a dimple appeared in one of his cheeks. If he laughs heartily, his dimples will definitely be even more good-looking, thought Ruka as she looked forward to him laughing. They then ate dinner in silence. Ruka finished half of the soup since it was too yummy. Not only that, but she was stuffed after eating 7 slices of the grilled steak. "Let me clear the table." She hurriedly stood up to clear the table when Ron put down his fork and spoon. Rin grabbed her hand that was holding the bowl to stop her. "Let me do it. You should go to sleep." Ruka's heart jumped. Seeing the large hand that was holding her hand, she retracted her hand in a fluster. I'm going back to my room, then." As long as the atmosphere became somewhat romantic, she'd feel flustered and panicky, not knowing what to do. She had no choice but to flee first. Ren's cell phone rang. He glanced at it before answering the phone. "Hello. Mr. Hassan, I've found out that Miss Singed was indeed locked inside the library by someone." "Who is it?" "It's a female intern named Mia Murillo. She's also the one who turned off the main switch," Elijah reported. Ren's voice was frosty with a hint of anger. "Hand the evidence to the translation department and get rid of her." "Roger that." After hanging up the phone, Ron stood up and cleared the table as swiftly and neatly as the way he usually did everything else. Ruka took a shower and did some reading in bed before falling asleep in exhaustion. In the midst of her sleep, she felt thirsty, for she had eaten too much of the steak just now. She checked the time. Seeing that it was 1:12 a.m., she got out of bed without bothering to change out of her pajamas, thinking that Ren must have gone to sleep at this hour. She opened the door and saw that the wall lights were on in the hallway outside. The light was dim with a touch of coziness. She went downstairs, found a glass, and went in the direction of the water dispenser before pouring a glass of warm water for herself and drinking from it. After finishing the glass of water, she headed toward the stairs. Just as she was going up the stairs, the door to the innermost room on the left side of the hallway opened, and Ren stepped out in a black silk nightrobe. Ruka was also heading in the same direction on her way back to her room. As soon as she turned a corner, she saw the man coming her way and was startled right away. With that, the two ran into each other in the hallway. Ruka watched in embarrassment as the man came toward her. The close-fitting silk nightrobe made him look tall and slender while showing the smooth outline of his figure. Moreover, the robe gaped open slightly, making his sharply outlined clavicle and his perfect-looking neck and shoulders faintly visible. At this very moment, he looked like an attractive and yet dangerous beast taking a leisurely stroll in its own territory. Ruka never thought she'd run into Ren in the hallway at such a late hour. After biting her lip in panic for a moment, she stammered, I went downstairs to get something to drink. I'm going back to my room now." Then, she walked toward him. The hallway was spacious, but it appeared narrow when she walked past him. Suddenly, a large hand grabbed her wrist and pinned her against the wall with tremendous strength, holding up her left hand in a surrendering gesture. The man grabbed her wrist with one hand while putting the other on her shoulder. In an instant, they were only inches away from each other. His gaze was fervent when it fell on her face. It was as if he had been troubled by his desire for a long time, so he didn't even need to conceal it upon facing his prey. Ruka's heart shuddered under Ren's stare. She looked up slightly, only to look into his eyes, which were as dark as the sea. They seemed to have a hint of self-restraint and forbearance in them, but they also looked like a bomb that would explode any time, causing her heartbeat to quicken in fear. She felt anxious and uneasy. She didn't know what he wanted to do, but she also had an idea what he was going to do. Ron left his room because he couldn't fall asleep. However, he never expected the young lady who had made him lose sleep to show up in front of him voluntarily. Isn't she letting herself fall prey to a predator? Doesn't she know how dangerous it is to wander around in my house at midnight? It hurts. Ruka couldn't help but cry out aggrievedly as her hand hurt in his grasp.
Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this story, please like and share so others can see it too. Also hit the subscription button and notification bell so you can be notified on our next release. Thank you for your support. God bless you.